Today we're taking a look at two amazing lenses, and it is going to be the battle of the portrait primes. So specifically, we're looking at the RF 50mm 1.2 lens and the RF 85mm 1.2 lens. And the 85 that I have here, this is not the defocus smoothing, I believe that's what it's called. It's not that version of the 85mm, it's just the standard version. So the 50mm lens right here, that's actually going to set you back around I believe it's $2,300, and the 85 is going to set you back $2,700. So these are not inexpensive. No matter how much money you have, you're really going to have to consider if you need these lenses and if they are essential to your workflow. I know some of you are thinking, why compare a 50mm to an 85? They're completely different and utilized in different scenarios, and I would agree with that, but at the same time I would also tend to think that there's a lot of photographers out there that are not ready to kind of go all in on the RF glass, and or are just unable to since it's so expensive, and are probably going to want to decide between either the 50 or the 85. And that's why I wanted to make this video, to kind of go over from my perspective what the pros and cons are for each lens. Should probably check to make sure I turn my mic on. Alright, I did. Also, these focal lengths are relatively close, so I think it's gonna make it a hard purchase for both of these RF lenses. And again, I think a lot of people are just going to be deciding between one of these portrait primes. I would say I use these lenses pretty equally, and I use them both for portrait work too. And I know that 85 is more of a classic and traditional portrait focal length, but I always did like the 50 for portraits. So before we get into the pros of each lens and why you might want to lean either towards the 50 or the 85, there are a couple of similarities that you're going to get no matter which way you go. Whichever lens you go with, you can be confident that you're going to get a really nice image coming from these RF lenses. You know, you could really say that for any of the RF lenses. The image quality is outstanding. You're getting really sharp photos with a lot of detail. Canon is eventually going to come out with higher megapixel bodies, and they made these L lenses to make sure that they could keep up with the resolution of those sensors. Both of these lenses utilize the USM autofocus technology, and now it's not the nano USM, which you'll find on the RF 70 to 200 or the 24 to 105. The type of autofocus motors that are utilized in these lenses are designed to move a lot of glass in a quick manner. So while the focus isn't as smooth and as elegant as the nano USM lenses, you're still going to be getting fast autofocus, especially when compared to the DSLR counterpart lenses. Alright, so first up, let's talk about the 50mm RF lens. So the first thing that comes to mind when I'm thinking about the 50mm is its size. It's a lot smaller than the 85mm. That means you're probably gonna be more likely to pick it up and utilize it in a variety of situations. Sometimes I look at the 85mm and I think to myself, I could probably just save on weight today and I don't need to bring this. So that is something to think about if you're gonna be in a lot of situations where you're gonna be holding your camera for a long period of time, or if you have a backpack and you're trying to save on weight, then the 50mm might be the way to go for you. Alright, second, and this one's pretty big, the price. So like I said, both of these lenses are super expensive. The 50mm is $2,300 and the 85 is $2,700. So if you go with the 50mm instead of the 85mm, you'll have an extra $400 or so that you could potentially put towards the RF 85mm f2 lens. Obviously it's not going to be as good as the 85 1.2. It is a really high performing lens, and I would say it's more versatile too, since you the minimum focus distance is a lot closer with that lens than on the 85 1.2. So this next one is definitely a personal preference, and that is that the 50mm is not as well corrected of a lens as the 85mm. So you will be getting more of that color fringing, not a lot, but more than the 85, since you don't have the BR element in the lens. But I think what that leads to is a lens that has a little bit more character, and I know that's sort of a subjective topic, but to me it kind of is clear when you look at the pictures that the rendering of the 50mm has more character, and it looks a little bit more unique than the overly corrected 85mm lens, which is outstanding, but again, it's a little bit more clinical. Obviously, the 50mm is going to be more versatile than the 85mm, so for less money, you're going to be able to utilize the lens in a wider variety of photography scenarios. So while with the 85 you might not be able to get certain group shots or individual shots even indoors, you might be able to get away with that with a 50mm. So for most photographers, I would say if you don't already have some kind of 50mm, I would definitely go with the RF 50mm first. And that also leads me into my next point, which is that currently for the RF mount, Samyang does make an 85mm 1.4 lens that is outstanding, and I think it's only $600. You'll have to double check on that, but I'm pretty sure. And the rendering on that lens is awesome. The autofocus is fast. The only thing with it is that it does render your images a little bit more yellow than the Canon lens, so you won't be getting as accurate of the colors straight out of the lens, but you can always kind of tweak that in post. And finally, I think that the 50mm does control flare a little bit better than the 85mm, and I'm not completely certain about that, but from personal experience, that's what I've noticed, and to me, that's pretty important just because I do shoot in a lot of backlit situations. Okay, so that is it for the 50mm lens. Let's move on to the 85. Man, look at this thing. It's like bigger than my head. Almost bigger than my head. So why might you want to go with the 85mm over the 50mm RF lens? Like I touched on in the previous section, the 85mm sort of is a lens that you get for if you want ultimate image quality. So there's literally no distortion on this lens. I've tried to get some color fringing, shooting in a variety of backlit situations or shooting directly into the sun, and I haven't been able to. So that's really amazing, especially for an 85mm lens, and you know, I've never seen anything like it before. Additionally, I've shot this lens at f1.2, and I was super surprised that when I did zoom in to 200% in Lightroom, that the corner of the image was just as sharp as the center of the image. So to me, you know, when I shot with Nikon and I had an 85mm 1.4 lens, that lens to me was more of a portrait lens, just because the corners kind of got soft when you shot wide open. But this would be an awesome landscape lens, or even an astrophotography lens, because even wide open you're getting a really clean shot all the way through the image. So the next one goes for the 50mm, but I would say more so with the 85mm is that you're getting outstanding resolving power even at 1.2. So to my eye, there's no difference in the amount of detail that's being resolved when you're shooting wide open, or even if you stop it down to, you know, f8. I'm sure there is a little bit of a difference, but it's nothing major and nothing that you are going to notice. So you'll notice in portraits when you shoot this wide open, you'll get tack sharp eyes, and then, you know, everything else will be out of focus. So it's pretty amazing. I think I mentioned this earlier, but again, if I didn't, Canon utilized a BR element in this lens, which really helps in fighting that color fringing that you get. So it's really hard to produce color fringing in this lens, which is amazing. For those of you that absolutely need a traditional portrait focal length, the 85mm to, you know, 135mm focal length, then, you know, you might have to go with the RF 85mm over the 50mm. This lens can be utilized for group portraiture if you're outside or in a large indoor space. So you know, for a lot of my family sessions, I do end up just exclusively using the 85mm just because it works for a variety of situations. You know, if the family members, like the adults, want individual portraits, then I feel more comfortable utilizing an 85mm over 50. But for kids, I actually don't mind using a 50mm, and I kind of prefer it because it just there's like I guess a more lighthearted look to the portraits. And like I said before, this lens would be great for taking landscape photos if you know you don't have to hike a long distance to get to your location. To sum everything up, I would say that to me, both the RF50 and the RF85 have been essential lenses and really kind of like staples of my kit. But if I had to choose one of these lenses, I would go with the 50mm just because I like the way it renders the images more than the 85, and it's more versatile. Not to mention it is $400 cheaper, which, you know, to me, it's a pretty good amount of money. So that is it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this content. Help me out by subscribing to get you more content. I'll talk to you later.